For social studies, we will be going on to the next lesson, and it is chapter 9, lesson 3, and it begins on page 332. And this week's lesson is on World War II and changes ahead. All right, so it starts with the photo. It says, after World War II, new neighborhoods outside of cities were created for soldiers and their families. People had hoped that World War I would be the war to end all wars, but the years following the war, though peaceful, were troubled. Then in 1939, Germany attacked Poland. Once again, countries in Europe took sides. Britain, France, and the Soviet Union joined together as the Allied forces. They fought the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. World War II had begun. So we had the Allied powers, and again, that was Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. And then we had the Axis powers, and those were Germany, Italy, and Japan. All right, World War II. At first, the United States tried to maintain neutral. Again, they did not want to take sides, just like World War I. Neutral means not supporting one side or the other. Then the Japanese launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, Japanese planes bombed American ships anchored in the harbor. Doris Miller, a Texas sailor, abandoned the USS West Virginia, saw it all. He defended his ship by shooting at the Japanese planes and received the Navy Cross for his bravery under fire. And this is a picture of, a picture of Doris Miller. All right, Doris Miller. So he defended his ship again. The United States declared, so after that happened on Pearl Harbor, the United States declared war on Japan and Germany. They joined the Allied powers again. Americans, included many Texans, rushed to defend their country. In fact, Texans sent a larger portion of its population to serve during the war than any other state. About 750,000 people, including 12,000 women. 750,000 people, including 12,000 women. A number of divisions or army groups trained in Texas. The men of the 36th Division proudly wore a patch with the letter T on an arrowhead. They were called the Texas Division. They were among the first Americans to go overseas. So now World War II has begun. Texans fought bravely in Africa, Asia, and Europe. 33 Texans won the Medal of Honor. This is the highest military honor. It is given for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. In fact, the most decorated Americans in the war was Lieutenant Audie Murphy of Farmville, Texas. Murphy joined the Army as a private. He was only 18 years old. He personally stopped an attack by enemy tanks, and he received 33 awards, citations, and decorations. Later, he became a successful actor and a songwriter. And this is a photo of Audie Murphy right here. Lieutenant Audie Murphy. General Dwight D. Eisenhower commanded United States forces in Europe. He led the troops in important battles and invasions, and he accepted the surrender of the Germans in 1945. Born in Denison, Texas, Eisenhower later became the 34th President of the United States. Number 1 says summarize, identify, and then briefly explain the impact that the bombing of Pearl Harbor had on life in Texas. So many Texans, after that happened, many Texans rushed to sign up to fight and help their country. And again, you can pause the video if you need to, so you could answer question number 1. And remember, there were 750,000 Texans. All right, the next page. More Texans in the war. About 500,000 Latinos fought bravely in World War II. Many of them were from Texas. Clito Rodriguez of San Antonio was one of the Mexican Americans to win the Medal of Honor. He saw action in the South Pacific, where he helped to defeat the Japanese. In 1975, an elementary school was named in his honor. Texan women. So here we go about women. Texan women played a vital role in the war. About 1,000 women served as pilots during the war. Many of them were trained in Texas. Ovida Culp Hobby of Houston helped to plan and run the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, and that was called the WAAC for the United States. The WAAC provided female volunteers a way to serve during the war. Under Hobby's direction, hundreds of thousands of women did a wide range of useful Army jobs, from parachute folding to secretarial work. Industry and war. Texas industries boomed during the war. Front and center was the oil industry. Battleships, planes, tanks, and jeeps all ran on gasoline. Texas Oil and Gas Company supplied about half of all the fuel that was needed for the war. Rubber made from petroleum and other materials also came from Texas factories. The United States government purchased these products from Texas. So we had oil and we also had rubber. Old businesses retooled to supply war materials. Materials were needed to make uniforms and tents. For example, Texas businessman Stanley Marcos found ways to help conserve textiles. Marcos had developed his family's company, Neiman Marcus, into it used to be a luxury clothing store. But in 1941, he joined the War Production Board. He helped convince Americans to make do with the clothing that they had. It says number 2, identify and underline two accomplishments of Stanley Marcus. And Stanley Marcus, he helped found ways to conserve. So we're going to put this one, found ways to help people conserve textiles. That is the first one. And then the second thing that Marcos did, he developed his family's company. That was the second thing that he did. All right, moving on to page 335. Other Texas industries also helped the war effort. Texas farmers grew huge amounts of crops to feed the Allies. To meet the demand of steel mills in Houston and Dangerville produced thousands of tons. Factories in Houston, Galveston, and Corpus Christi built ships. Airplanes were built near Dallas and Fort Worth. So farmers grew many things to meet the demands of steel. So in Houston, they had steel mills. and that was Houston and Dangerfield. And factories in Houston, so Houston, Galveston, and I'm going to put CC for Corpus Christi, built ships. And then Dallas built airplanes. So there were a lot of things in Texas that were being created and built for the army, or for the war. As the demand for war materials increased, so did the demand for workers. Women took the jobs of men who had gone to war. 500,000 rural Texans moved to Texas cities to work. So 500,000, they moved to Texas cities to work in wartime factories, because these were all the products that they were beginning to build or to make. So did people from around the country and from Mexico. Cities grew rapidly. The number of wage earners in Texas more than doubled from 1939 to 1945. And in 1945, the Axis powers surrendered. The Allies had won. And remember, the United States was part of the Allies. Millions of people, including 22,000 Texans, had died in the fighting and from other causes. Those who came home found a different place. The Great Depression was over. And if you remember, they created the government programs to help Americans get out of the Great Depression. We learned that in the lesson before this one. Texas industry was on the move. Number 3 says, suppose you were an airplane factory worker for rural Texas during World War II. Describe how the economic laws of supply and demand allowed you this work opportunity. All right, so we're moving on to page 336. Texas culture and art. As times changed rapidly in the 1900s, some Texans saw a need to preserve the past. So objects and inventions that had once seemed modern were being quickly replaced with newer things. So Texans built museums to preserve our rich history. The oldest state museum is the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. That's the oldest one. Okay, it holds a real windmill, a chuck wagon, arrowheads, and more. Many other museums were built with Texas when Texas celebrated its 100 years of independence in 1936. One of these, the San Jacinto Monument and Museum, honors the heroes of the Battle of San Jacinto. The museum tells the history of Texas and the region over thousands of years. These Texas musicians of the early 20th century also left their mark on Texas history. We've got Julius Lorenzo Cobb, Bledsoe of Waco sang opera and musicals, composed music, and acted in films. An African American, he was famous in Europe as well in the United States. So Tejana singer Cleo Silva of Brownsville became an international star with her hits on the radio. Lydia Mendoza of Houston was called the Lark of the Border. She recorded an estimated 50 albums during her long career as a conjunto singer. The conjunto style combines traditional Mexican music and German polkas. For her contribution to Mexican American music, Lydia Mendoza received many awards, including the National Medal of Arts in 1999. Number 4 says, restate the contributions of Julius Lorenzo Cobb, Bledsoe, and Cleo Silva in the development of Texas. So we're going to write Julius or let's Julius Lorenzo Cobb Bledsoe, and he was the person that, if we look back at what we read, he was a singer who brought culture. Actually, Julius Lorenzo Cobb Bledsoe and Cleo Silva, they were both singers. Who brought culture to the state and the world. I'm sorry. Who brought culture to the state and the world. And again, you can pause the video to have a little bit more time to finish writing your answer. All right, so page 337. A changing country. So because of World War II, the country started changing. Following World War II, new troubles arose. The United States and the Soviet Union entered a conflict called the Cold War. It was fought in smaller conflicts like the Korean and the Vietnam Wars. The two countries also fought with ideas, words, and money. As a democracy, the United States opposed communism, the political system of the Soviets. So communism is a system in which the government owns all the property in a country. So this was the reason for the Cold War. Okay. Under the free enterprise system in the United States, private individuals own most of the property. In spite of the Cold War, the United States experienced economic prosperity. Many Texans had more money than ever before. They bought things such as cars and homes. Cars and new highways had an impact on life in Texas. In the 1950s, the United States government began building the interstate highway system. It connected the large cities of the country. The new roads linked Americans in new ways. Remember, if we have a road to go from one state to another state, then that gives us more access to different jobs and for traveling. It connected large cities to the country. The new roads linked Americans in new ways. They added to the interdependence of states and regions. The new roads made trade and travel between states easier. New roads in Texas also meant that people could live farther from their jobs than they had before. They could live farther from their jobs than they had before. Many people began moving to the suburbs, and the suburbs is a community next to or near a big city. In the 1950s, the building of expressways for automobiles helped suburbs to develop and grow all around cities such as Houston. This was a new pattern of settlement. People could buy less expensive houses in the suburbs. Families clustered there. What did families in the suburbs do for fun? They watched the newest invention, television. So television got invented. Grocery stores soon began selling another new idea, special frozen meals called TV dinners. Identify and explain where and why suburbs developed in Texas after World War I. They were cheaper. Houses were cheaper. And accessible, let's put and close to cities due to cars and new roads. and new roads. And there's a photograph there of one of the highways right there, the white lines. Those are the highways. Okay, so moving on to page 338. Civil rights movement. While many Americans prospered in the 1950s and 1960s, others continue to face serious problems. Okay, many African Americans, and this was the civil rights. Many African Americans and Mexican Americans did not have the same rights as Anglo Americans. Denied equal opportunity, they earned less money for the same job. So, they were treated unfairly at school and at work. African Americans could not go into some restaurants and movie theaters or even ride in the front seats of buses. So let's go ahead and make a list of some of the problems for the civil rights movement. Let's squeeze that in here. All right, so one, they did not have the same rights. The same equal rights. They were denied equal opportunity. They earned less money. And I'm going to put a dollar symbol. They were treated unfairly at schools and work. They could not go into restaurants, not allowed in restaurants. Movies, or front seats of buses. And it said some Mexican American children had to go to separate schools in Texas. This unfair separation based on race is called segregation. Okay, segregation, and that are all of the rights that were not equal, not even, they were not the same. That was called segregation. African Americans and Mexican Americans struggled to end segregation and discrimination in all their forms. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a national movement to give all individuals equal rights. People marched to show their support. In Texas, the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, fought in the courts for the desegregation of Mexican schools and other civil rights for Mexican Americans. Civil rights are the rights of people to enjoy freedom and equality. The work of thousands of activities help people throughout Texas gain their civil rights. Today, segregation is illegal. So everything that we listed is illegal. In 1964, the United States Congress created a law sponsored by President Lyndon B. Johnson, the Civil Rights Act. So the Civil Rights Act right here made their fair treatment the law of the land. People could no longer be treated differently based on their race, religion, or gender. All right, so a need for civil rights. Here, we're looking at problem and solution. It said many African Americans and Mexican Americans did not have the same rights and opportunities as Anglo Americans. The solution is that people join together to show support for civil rights. And unfair laws were changed. Okay, and again, like I said before, you can pause the video as you need to so you can finish taking your notes. All right, so the last page, oops, so this one. In 1967, Texans elected Barbara Jordan to the Texas Senate. She was the first black state senator since 1883. She helped African Americans register to vote in the 1960s. The civil rights activist and lawyer from Houston went on to become president of the Texas Senate. Later, she became the first African American woman from a southern state to serve in the United States Congress. In 1994, she received Presidential Medal of Freedom. Many changes have taken place since the 1960s, but more work remains to secure fair treatment and equal rights and opportunity for everybody. Okay, so that is your lesson for World War II and changes ahead. And you could work on 7, 8, and 9. 7, it says identify the impact of life in Texas of major events faced by Texas and the United States following the attack of Pearl Harbor. Here, people in Texas and the rest of the United States faced, so we're going to put people faced World War II. The Cold War also happened. And the struggle for civil rights. The struggle for civil rights. Number 8. Suppose you are a student in Texas during World War II. Write a letter to a relative in another state. Describe how your life has changed in good ways and bad. So you're going to think of yourself being a student during this time and write that letter to a relative. Number 9, summarize the ways in which Barbara Jordan participated in the democratic process. She participated in the democratic process by becoming a lawyer, registering citizens to vote, and winning political office. All right. Like I said, that is your lesson on World War II and the changes ahead.